My name is Keira Solon, and I'm an assistant professor of business communication and event management at the University of Central Missouri. So I just really want to say I appreciate you guys all being here this afternoon. I'm sorry about the time change. It was my understanding you guys didn't have electricity for hours, so we canceled the workshop. And then the electricity came back on right when we canceled the workshop, and so then we uncanceled the workshop, but I was still in Warrensburg, which is where I work, which is an hour and 15 minutes away. So then I got in my car and got here as quickly as I could. So I do appreciate you all being flexible with the timing. I'm happy that I was able to end up coming today and we could do this, and so we didn't have to reschedule for later. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about the job search and about interviewing. And in full disclosure, this is actually two presentations or two workshops that I smashed together and then took out a bunch of stuff that wasn't as important so we could get it into the 1 hour time frame. So if there are holes in the things that I'm saying, you're like, wait, I need to know more about that aspect before you move on. Please don't hesitate to ask at any time. You don't have to wait until the end of the workshop. I'm happy to address questions as they arise. On the other side of that, know that I'm trying to get through a lot of content. So, like I said, we're going to talk about job search and we're going to talk about interviewing. If the information makes sense to you and you like what you want to hear and you want to understand the next step in the progression, I will actually be back next Tuesday, assuming you have electricity and everything else, right? And I'll be talking about salary negotiation. So we find a job, we interview for a job, and then we negotiate our salary once they offer us the job. And so that's really the logic and the progression of information and the way that I'm going to be presenting it. So as far as, I thought this worked. I was telling Sydney before we started, I teach business communication, and always when my students are presenting, the clicker doesn't work, and they're like, oh God, what do I do? I'm like, oh, you press the arrow key, and then it moves the slides for you. So I will be doing some arrow key pressing today. What we are going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about managing your job search. And when we talk about managing the job search, I have that broken down into two subcategories. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about traditional strategies, and then I'm also going to talk to you about assertive strategies, because depending on the type of job search you're leading, you probably need to know about both of those strategies. And then we're going to talk about interviewing. In interviewing, the three main areas that I'm going to address are the common questions that you'll be asked and how to best prepare to answer those questions, situational-based questioning, because that will likely comprise the majority of the content that people are seeking from you as an interviewer, and then a little bit of information on how to follow up. So those are our five main categories of information for this afternoon. First of all, managing your job search. I like to start with a little bit of background of information, because I think it's important to understand that when you are looking for a job and you're thinking about organizations that are hiring, there are actually 4 different stages of a job opening. When most of us are thinking about applying for jobs, we're typically targeting this 4th stage. Okay, we see a job, it's posted online, now we're going to apply. And that's an okay place to go about finding a job. We're going to talk a little bit more about that soon enough, but what I want you to understand is that there are actually 3 other stages of a job opening that typically occur before you will ever see that job posting. And this is really important information to understand, because if you want to maximize your potential to explore as many opportunities as possible and to compete against as few other people as possible, okay, it's important to understand the 4 stages of the job opening. So the first stage of the job opening is there is no job opening. There's not actually a position, or there's not actually a vacancy that exists. Now, public practice hiring practices and private hiring practices are they're a lot different. But if you are looking at working in the private sector, so outside of the public sector, in general, private organizations can hire whenever they want to and whenever they have the means to. And so that's what we consider to be the first stage of the job opening is, no, we don't have a position, but we like to hire good people. So if I meet a good person, I'm not just going to turn him back out there to get hired by somebody else. I'm going to go ahead and hire him and create a position for him or merge him onto an existing team. That's the first stage of the job opening, is there's not really an opening, but organizations are always seeking to hire good people. So if they encounter good people and they have the means to bring them on board, they sometimes will. Okay, that's stage 1. Stage 2 is there is a clear need. The insiders know that that need exists to add a new type of employee, but there's no action being taken. So somebody's left the organization, or they know somebody will be leaving the organization, or they're developing a new project team or a new product team. So there's this idea out there that, yes, we're going to need to add new people and new expertise to our existing base, but we're not really doing it yet. We're not actively, we don't have a job description, we're not actively seeking people. So that is the second stage. The third stage is when the job is actually open. Okay, there's a position that's been created and we need somebody to fill it. So if you know somebody, send a good person my way. And this is typically where you would look at your existing personnel and you think who might be good to put into this role, or you would ask for referrals. Hey, I heard that your son just graduated from college. Is he interested in working here? Okay, that's the third stage of the job opening. And then again, the fourth stage of the job opening is that the opening is advertised. You find it on Indeed, you find it on LinkedIn, you find it on the company website or the organization's website, and they're openly accepting applications from anybody and everybody who wants to apply. So those are the 4 different stages of the job opening. As you consider these 4 different stages of the job opening, clearly as you move from that first stage to that fourth stage, it becomes a lot more competitive. Because at the first stage, you're not really competing with anybody. There's no job, right? You just happen to be a great person that they want to snag. When you move up to the fourth stage, you're competing with everybody that knows how to use the internet and fancies himself as having a similar expertise as you. So it does become more competitive as you go through the job openings. So when we talk about the traditional search versus the assertive search, when I'm talking about the traditional search, which I will spend a little bit of time with, I'm talking about responding at stage 4. I see a job posting. I want to apply for the job posting. What are some best practices and strategies for applying for that job posting? When I talk to you about the assertive search, I'm talking more about targeting phases 1 through 3. I know I'm going to need a job, or I know I want to leave my job, or I know that there's an organization or industry that I want to explore. And so how do I find the opportunities that aren't available online yet? Okay. So that's kind of the difference between the 2 different strategies that we're going to be talking about. So when we talk about the traditional job search, and when I use the term traditional job search, I mean, hey, I'm Googling it and I'm looking at different company websites and I'm finding a posting and I'm responding to the posting. And that's an okay way to job search. I mean, somebody's getting those jobs, right? It might be you. But I think it's important to understand that doing that type of job posting, depending on what sort of statistics you're looking at, typically yields about a 15 to 35% return. So only about 15 to 35% of job seekers that are utilizing the open job market are actually finding their jobs by responding to a job posting. So if you have a job and you're happy where you're at, no big deal, right? You'll stay there until you find something better and you'll just use this open job posting. But if you know, for example, that you're getting ready to graduate or you're getting ready to encounter a new industry or a new challenge in your life, using this traditional job search where you're just sending in resumes and you're responding to postings is probably not maximizing your full ability to find new employment. If you do choose to use the traditional strategy, you see a job posting and you're responding to that job posting, it's really important that your materials and the information that you are submitting speak to the position and are jumping out of the pile from the other candidates. No matter how competitive your industry is, it is not unreasonable to think that you will be applying against dozens, if not hundreds, of other applicants for the same position. Now, statistically speaking, and again, I'm throwing you lots of statistics and it depends on what source of information, so I'm kind of giving you aggregate information here. About 50 to 60% of the people who apply for a job are not even qualified. So if 200 people apply for the same job as you, probably only 100 of them actually have the qualifications and will advance forward through the HR process. But 100 other people is still a lot of people when they are typically going to hire 1 or maybe 2 individuals into the position. So if you are using the traditional job search and you're responding to postings that are open, it's really important that you get your resume or your curriculum vitae and your cover letter noticed. And some strategies to do that is, number 1, apply for the right jobs. Again, as I just told you, half of all people that apply for a job aren't even qualified for a job. Make sure that you are actually qualified for that position. Look at their required qualifications. And if in that job posting it says these 8 things are absolutely required, then they're generally absolutely required. Look at the preferred qualifications. They're typically going to want a candidate with the preferred qualifications, but if you meet some and not others, it's usually okay to go ahead and apply, but just understand that you might be at a little bit of a disadvantage. Be specific when you're applying for each job. Go back to your resume or your curriculum vitae and back to your cover letter and rearrange, organize, and highlight your information in those documents based on what's being posted in the job opening. So look and see the order of the information and then go and rearrange your information accordingly. As I mentioned, I work at the University of Central Missouri, and we are a teaching institution. And so we prioritize teaching way above research, okay? So when we have candidates, I've served on lots of hiring committees there for faculty lines, and we'll have candidates that have really, really awesome research experience. And it's like the first 3 or 4 pages of their vita will be research. And then as you get to page 5 or 6, they have this little area about teaching. Well, that's out of line with our priorities. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to consider that candidate. I will look and I will evaluate on a case-by-case basis, but the ones that are going to catch my eye, the ones that are going to move to the top of my pile for people that I want to consider are the ones that are really highlighting their teaching experience and their experiential methodologies in the classroom, because that's what we do. Okay, and as academics, they might be applying to a UCM, then they might be applying to a KU. And so I'm telling them, you can do that. You can apply to UCM where we value teaching, and you can apply to KU where they value research. But what you need to do is you need to switch around your materials so you're targeting the institution. The same is true in the private sector. You might have really good experience in X competency and in Y competency. Look to see what's listed first in the job posting. Look to see what the organization values, and then arrange your materials accordingly, okay? Target the posting or the institution in your cover letter. I have read so many cover letters in my lifetime that are like, I'm pleased to submit this application to the University of Wisconsin. I'm like, well, that's not us. So guess I won't be looking at you any further. And then also use good design strategies. Your resume and your cover letter should be visually appealing, or they should at least not make me hate looking at it. Okay, again, there's enough candidates out there in the job market that if something is not enticing to look at, I probably just won't.
Sorry, what constitutes like a good looking one?
That's,
you talking like aesthetically or like the content on it?
That's a really good question. What constitutes a good looking one? Am I talking, I'm not gonna throw you the box. I'm gonna repeat your question because I don't do that very well. Is it the content or is it the aesthetics? I would say both. Content is going to be primary, right? People are looking to make sure that you have the right skills and qualifications. But if it's not organized in a way that's clean and clear and easy for me to read, then I may not identify that you have the right skills. And so some of the tricks to use is make sure that you're using enough white space. People like to cram everything into the resume so it looks really, really full. And while you want a full looking resume, you also want to use spaces between sections, for example. Make sure that you're using bolding so your headings are standing out. I'm certainly not advocating for graphic design unless you're in a creative industry, then I might be, but more page design, just making sure that the page is easy to follow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've just seen somewhere people want to like use colorful fonts and put pictures, and they said, well, I went to this workshop and they told me to make it look pretty. And I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, in some industries that could be okay. So if you were in marketing or if you were in communications or you were in advertising, that may, or graphic design, that could also be a work sample. And so you're showing, oh, look at my ability to design logos, or look at my ability to use colors. And this is just my experience, so it might be anecdotal, but when the lay person tries to do those things, they're very regularly executed poorly, and it looks poor, right? It looks like a little bit childish. I would advocate, and again, this is all very discipline specific, but depending on your industry, if you want to use a little bit of color to pop out, a nice navy for your headings, or gray against black, those types of things, I would advocate more than doing bright red or bright orange. But again, I think that that's not really where I want to put my focus. What I want to put my focus on when I'm talking about design strategies is making the information easy to navigate. Yes, Sydney?
Is it inappropriate to rearrange your past experiences
reverse chronological order. So the question was, and I will give you a box, is it inappropriate to rearrange your experience based on the job posting as opposed to following reverse chronological order? The short answer is no. It would be appropriate to rearrange your experience based on the job posting outside of reverse chronological order if you put things into different sections. So you might take all the experience that you've had that's related to that job and have a related experience section that is reverse chronological order. And then another section that is called additional experience, where you list those other jobs that may have happened currently or in between. So within section, you always want to be in reverse chronological experience, but you can have different sections. Like my two areas of expertise are business communication and events management. So if I were applying for a job in the events management industry, I haven't managed events professionally for several years. So my current job would probably be in a section called teaching experience or academic experience, higher ed experience or whatever. But above that, I might have a section called events management experience where I'm bringing in my older jobs from the events management realm. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? Okay. Any other questions about traditional strategy before we move on to talking about assertive strategy? Okay, perfect. So assertive strategy. With the assertive strategy, this is when we tap into what is called the hidden job market. So these are those stages 1, 2, and 3 stages in the job market where there's not actually an open job, but it doesn't mean that there may not be a position that's available to you. This is where you identify where you want to work. And some of the ways that we do that is through volunteer work, through our professional networks, through conferences, through LinkedIn, through professional associations, or Google it, top 10 ed tech companies. Whatever, look and see what's out there. Doing an assertive job search will yield approximately a 70 to 80% return. So 70 to 80% of job seekers receive their position through an assertive job search. If you want to manage the assertive job search, some things that I would encourage you to think about is, first of all, when you're doing an assertive job search, it's going to be up to you to make direct contact. Because these organizations don't necessarily have positions posted, unless you're out there being headhunted, which you might be if you have a high level of expertise, but if you're just the normal person just looking to get your start, right? You're going to be out there making direct contact. There are 2 different categories of individuals within an organization that it is beneficial with whom to make direct contact. The first of those organizations is recruiters. And when recruiters' jobs are to recruit, right, and to identify and to hire, in many instances, qualified personnel for organizations. Most larger organizations are going to have recruiters. You can reach out directly to recruiters. You can let them know what your skills and qualifications are, get them your resume, and have communication with them, add each other on LinkedIn, et cetera, and begin to facilitate a relationship. So that's one category of people that it's okay to reach out to and be like, I like your company. I don't know if you have anything right now, but I'm interested in working for you. Here's who I am. Let me get you added to my network. The other type of people that it makes benefit to make direct contact with are decision makers. And when I'm talking about decision makers, I'm talking about people of authority within the organization. So your executive level positions, your managerial level positions, the people that might actually hire you. The difference is when you reach out to a recruiter, it's okay to say, hey, I need a job. I'm looking for a job with your company. When you reach out to an executive or to a decision maker, it's better to take of an approach of, I want to learn from you. Someday I might like to be employed with your company, so I want to learn more about what it is you guys do. Can I do an informational interview with you? Can we meet for coffee to discuss your company? Okay, one of the examples I think of, as I mentioned, I live in Warrensburg, and several years ago they were building a huge Dollar Tree manufacturing warehouse thing. It's not really manufacturing, it's all warehouse. And my husband works in transportation. He actually works here in Kansas City at C.H. Robinson as an account manager. And he was knowing that here was this huge operation going in that was going to have lots of transportation needs. And so he tracked down the CEO of Dollar Tree on LinkedIn and sent him an email. Now, he never responded, but about 3 weeks later, he got a call from a recruiter from Dollar Tree who had the message was passed from the CEO to the next guy to the next guy to the appropriate level, right? Who then reached out to my husband, and he did participate in their hiring process, up not being the correct fit for him as far as what they were offering. But he reached out to the decision maker and said, here I am, here's everything I can do for you. And decision makers like to have good people out there. So they may not be the one that reaches back, but if you catch their eye, if your skills and qualifications are impressive to them, they will likely push you down the line and get somebody in contact with you. Okay, so that's one thing you can do in the assertive job search. It's really important as you're doing this that you're focusing on building relationships. The recruiter may not have anything for you right now. Okay, but if they tell you about things that they do have and you have a friend that might be interested in that, recruiters love that. Oh no, I'm really not in marketing, but I have a friend that's in marketing. Let me see if they're interested. And then you let me know when something in medical sales comes up or whatever I'm interested in. Okay. It's important as you go through this process, even though you're not just sitting behind the computer Googling jobs, that we still utilize technology. If there are specific companies and organizations that you're interested in working for, set up a Google News alert, because you're going to want to know when they build a new facility, or when they establish a new product line, or when they move to the Kansas City area. Okay, you're going to want to know what's going on in that company. If you are able to, from an external perspective, sign up for a company newsletter. So that's when you're going to find out when they're developing new divisions, where they're developing new products, when they're developing new projects. And then that's going to be when things likely move from a stage 1 opening to a stage 2 or 3 opening. Oh, look, they're opening this entire thing in South Kansas City. They're going to need people to work there. Look, here's me, okay? So it is still important to utilize technology, and LinkedIn is always a really, really awesome place to connect with people, especially if you're at stages 1, 2, and 3. You just want to start building a network. You just want to start dialoguing with people in your industry. LinkedIn is a good place to keep those people and to maintain professional contact. And then finally, the last tip I would have when dealing with the assertive strategy is make sure that you're practicing good communication. So if people reach out to you, that you are consistently responding. Even if the recruiter keeps reaching out to you with jobs that aren't what you're looking for, still be gracious, still email back, still acknowledge that they have reached out to you, because if you stop communicating, you're indicating that you're no longer interested. Okay, so make sure that you're maintaining good communication throughout. Did you have a question? Okay. Okay, any questions about assertive strategies? Great, I must be explaining things very well. So 8 steps for job search success. These are just a couple things to keep in mind. If you are out there actively on the job market, or you know that you're going to be on the job market, here are some things to keep in mind. Number 1, take at least 1 step daily. It can begin to feel very, very, very overwhelming and very oppressive. Do one thing each day. Call that company, send that email, revise your resume, find a posting to apply to. Take 1 step daily. Make sure that you're being flexible, because your idea of the perfect job may not actually align with the reality of the jobs that are available right now. And I'm not saying that you have to accept something that's beneath your level, but be flexible as far as the types of positions that you would consider. Spend a lot of your time networking, attending conferences, attending professional association meetings, going to even events like this. This is going to likely be a better use of your time than it is going to be just sitting behind your computer searching for job postings all day long. Make sure that you keep a record of everything you apply to. Because if you're actively job seeking, you might apply to lots and lots of jobs. And it may take longer than you think it should for somebody to respond to you. So you might apply for a job and not hear back for 2 months, and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I remember I submitted to KU Med. Gosh, I wonder what position that was. Okay, have a spreadsheet, have some sort of an organizational system, so when people do start reaching back, you remember when you applied, what you applied to, and what materials you sent to them. Broaden your geographic boundaries if you are able. Sometimes we have places where we would like to work, but then sometimes there's other places where there's actually jobs. Okay, some of us are bound by geographic considerations, but some people feel bound by geographic preference. Make sure that you know the difference, okay? Plan to work harder than you thought. It is, going through the job search can be very, very challenging, and so just understand that if it feels like hard work, it's normal. It's not that you're doing something wrong, it's just a challenging thing to do. Know your market and research the different institutions or organizations that you're interested in working for. And then finally, what I think is most important is managing your mindset. Very often you get told no more than you get told yes. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. That doesn't mean that you're not a good candidate. It doesn't mean that you wasted all your money on college. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that that's not the right opportunity for you right now. So manage your mindset. Some final thoughts about the job search. If you are currently getting ready to start your job search, until you have a job, getting a job is your job. Okay, it can take a significant amount of time, hours and hours and hours, in order for that job to be your job. The process can be long. I say expect, if you're looking for your first professional position in your select field, it could be 3 to 9 months. Now, most of you guys are in the medical science or health-related professions, and so that's a higher demand industry than lots of industries, but the process could still be long. And if you're looking at working in higher education, the process likely will be long. Okay, especially if you're looking towards working in the professoriate or anything like that. I know when I started as a faculty member, my first interview was in November and I started in August. So it's on a different clock. If you're looking for federal employment, it works on a different clock. It can take a long time. Keep your head up, manage your mindset. It can be the most difficult part of the process. This one I think is really, really important though, in juxtaposition. When it rains, you can apply to 50 jobs and never hear anything. And then you get a call back for an interview, and then the same day you get 3 more calls for 3 more interviews. I've been working in this industry for a long time, since 2002. So what is that? Yikes, a long time, okay? And this is just a universal truth. I'm sure there's absolutely no science behind it, but the job search, a lot of it is about momentum. And once your momentum has shifted, your momentum is shifted. So you'll be like, yay, I got an interview. Oh, wow, now I have 9 interviews in the next 2 weeks. That's just the way it works, so be prepared for that. And remember, you only need one. I know you want every job you apply to, and you want every opportunity you see, and you deserve every job you apply for, but when it comes down to it, you only need one job, if it's a career job, right? And so you have to think that the right one is the one that will come along. So those are my final thoughts when it comes to the job search. I want to move on to talk about interviewing. So once you get through the job search and you start getting all these interviews, you have some information. But before I do, any job search questions or anything you want me to address? Yes, sir. Okay.
Have you run into cases like there's a company I applied to, and then they send me a confirmation email saying we confirm that we have received your application. But then the next thing they say is that please let us know if you already have the other offers from different companies, so we can expedite our process of your application. I wonder what is the mentality behind such kind of email? What are they thinking? Why do they think this question is important?
What is your area of expertise? The area for your particular industry, it's because there's not a ton of people out there that do what you do, right? And so they don't want to lose qualified people. It's likely that they are in maybe a stage 3 of the process where the need is there, but they're not entirely sure how they want to move forward or how they want to fill it, but they also don't want to lose candidates that might be good. Mm-hmm.
But from an applicant's point of view, I would feel that I'm not that important to them if they ask a question like this. But if I do end up having offers, why would I go to a company that doesn't, value me high as I expected they won't? I should be, right?
Are you guys hearing what he's saying? Because I think this is a really important point, and this is, I'm trying to think how to say this without sounding awful. I guess I'll just be honest. Very often, they don't care.
Yeah.
Right? Like they care about your expertise and they want good people in play, but companies in general, organizations have a history of not treating applicants so nice through the process. And so at that point in the process, you're not a real person to them, you are a set of skills to them. Hopefully, once they make contact with you and they interview you, then you become a real person and they treat you with a little bit more nicety and sensitivity, but that's not uncommon, this idea of, or like you'll call people and they won't call back. Why would they not call back if they want good candidates? I don't know, because they just don't, right? They're consumed with their own needs. Now, your question is to why would that make you want to work for them? It probably doesn't. And if that doesn't align with your value system, then that's probably not a great place for you to work. You asked another question in there that I wanted to address. I'm trying to back up what you said as far as.
Like why, so, okay, I think you answered my question pretty well at this point.
Because it's a pretty, and not all companies, organizations, and institutions are going to be like this. And so I don't want to create a horrible picture of every organization, but it's been my experience in the 20 years that I've been working into this industry that people and organizations, especially with the technology and the increasing amount of technology that's available for the process, it's becoming less and less of a human experience. And so let me categorize you based on what you say your need is or based on what you say you want, and then I'll get back to you when it's convenient for me. Now, the reason that you might, from a candidate side, you might have some offers and so you do follow up with them, is some people do have very, very specific organizations that they want to work for. And regardless of how they're being treated through the process, you may really want to work for X company. And so you don't want to accept your offer with Y company until at least X knows that you're out there and they can tell you what they have to offer you. Because some people work that way as well, as far as leveraging these competing entities against each other. But yeah, it doesn't feel very good. It really doesn't. And one thing I will say is as you go through the job search process, lots of times things won't feel very good. But that's something that's really important to pay attention to, because the right organization for you, regardless of whether their practices are warm and fuzzy or they're callous or whatever, they will feel right to you. And that's going to be a good indication that that might be an organization that you want to work with. A lot of this experience of the job search is using your intuition. And if it doesn't feel right in your gut, if it doesn't feel right on the inside, it's probably not the right opportunity for you. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so you did all this really hard, soul-crushing job searching, right? And then you didn't hear anything back forever. Now, all of a sudden, you're getting all these calls for interviews. And so you want to be prepared to go into the interview. I want to talk about the interview process, and I want to talk about commonly asked interview questions. I think it's important to understand when you're going into the interview process, very rarely is it just going to be one interview. Now, there are exceptions, and sometimes it will be. They call you in, they interview you, you get the job or you don't. But because there is so much, one, because there are so many candidates in the job market, two, because there's so much technology available, very often it's not just an interview, it's an interview process. And so the first interview is what we typically refer to as a screening interview. And screening interviews will usually happen over the phone, via Skype, via Zoom, some sort of method of technology where they're not bringing everybody into the office. And then the actual hiring interview is going to generally happen in person, but that also depends on where you're looking geographically. It used to be for the hiring interview, they were always going to fly you there, but technology is so good now that they may just Zoom you in. If you're looking somewhere close, they probably want you to come in. If you're looking far away, they may just want you to Zoom in. So the important thing to understand about the screening interview versus the hiring interview is the objectives of those two different interviews. In the screening interview phase, they are looking for reasons not to hire you. So they had, let's say, 162 qualified applicants. They narrowed it down to 12 people that they want to conduct screening interviews with. So they set up those phone interviews, Skype interviews, Zoom interviews, whatever. And during that process, they have 12 and they know they want 3. So the questions that they're asking you are probably, in most instances, going to be fairly basic questions. Who are you? What do you know about our organization? Why do you think that you're a good fit for the organization? And they're going to be using the content provided there to decide why you shouldn't be one of the top 3 people. Okay, because they're getting rid of more people than they're retaining at this phase. Most organizations will try to bring 3 to 5 people to the organization, or at least do a full-on hiring interview. In the hiring interview stage, the focus is shifted. It's not who do we get rid of, it's who do we want to keep. Who is the right fit and the right person for this organization and for this position. Screening interviews are oftentimes very short, maybe 20 minutes long, 30 minutes long. Hiring interviews can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. If you're in higher education, 2 days. Okay, so it really just kind of depends on the organization, the type of position. But the hiring interview is typically a little bit more intense. The screening interview, they're doing a matching of values. The hiring interview, they're trying to understand your behavior, your responses, and how your previous actions will predict your future performance. It's kind of the difference between a screening interview and a hiring interview. And then some organizations have other steps in the process. You do a background check, you have to take a personality inventory. There may be other things that go along with the interview process. Yes, ma'am. Oh, personality inventory. It can be a number of different instruments that organizations use in order to measure you and your personality. Some people use predictive indexes where they have maybe 5 or 6 questions that they have people answer. Some people use like a Myers-Briggs personality type, so they see if you're an INFJ or whatever your personalities are. There's a ton of them out there. This is really common in corporate America, especially where they're looking for the right style of individual. It's also very, very common in the financial industry. So in higher education, healthcare, I'm not saying that those things never happen, but we're more looking at background screenings and criminality issues and, you know, those types of things. But again, depending on what you want to do, especially if you're wanting to do anything sales related, there's a good chance that you might be subjected to personality inventories just so they can find out a little bit more about you and what motivates you. I don't know that there's a, that would be very, 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 very industry specific. I would say when a committee sits down to do screening calls, this really depends on what the resources they have. If they have an entire HR team that's just hiring for this one position, then they could do hundreds of these, right? What's your industry? Okay, are you wanting to work in industry? Or are you wanting to work in higher education? Are you wanting to work for large organizations? You're open to anything? We're just going to say 10 to 12. That may vary considerably. And it's also going to depend on an applicant pool. Even though the screening interview is where they are deciding who not to keep, they're still not going to bother if they don't have a qualified applicant pool. So I know as a general practice, when you're reviewing applications, anybody been on a hiring committee before? A couple of people? Okay, so what happens is, here's your list of everybody who's qualified. So usually HR looks and says, no, you can't even look at these people. They're not going to meet, right? Here's your list of people who's qualified. Usually as you're looking, and there could be multiple people on the committee, objectively, a top tier forms. Everybody, right? Am I right? Everybody I got in this pile is qualified, but these are the people that just seem to be the best. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 19. When that top tier forms, those are the ones you screen. And it usually, you may go into it thinking, okay, we want to do phone interviews for 10. But if we have 14 people in that pile, we're going to go ahead and do a phone interview, because when that top tier becomes established and here's our upper echelon of applicants, we're going to at least take time to loosely explore them all. And so that's why it's so hard to give me, it all depends on how many qualified people are applying and then how many resources they have. Is that consistent with your guys' experience? There's just people who are clearly better for the position than others, and we're going to try to talk to all of them. Okay, good question. So when you actually get to the interview phase, some of the questions that you'll likely be asked, or at least some of the information that you want to prepare, is listed up here. Almost all interviews are going to start with a question that's something like, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your experiences, or tell us about who you are. There's a lot of advice on there on how to answer these questions. But the 3 main things that I would encourage you to think about is, number 1, be memorable. And not necessarily in a bad way, definitely not in a bad way, okay? In this question, the essence of what you are presenting to people is going to be information that's on your resume or your vita, and you're sort of giving them the synopsis of the greatest accomplishments. But instead of just telling them things that they could have read from your resume, you want to pick out some of the things in there that are also memorable. So did you win a particular award? Did you spend some time overseas? Is there a particular organization that's noteworthy? This may also be a time where you bring in things from your personal life. And I would generally suggest as a rule that we don't openly share things in an interview that would be illegal for them to ask. So like, I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I talk about my kids a lot. I would want to work in a family-friendly environment, but I also know that they can't ask me if I have kids, so I probably wouldn't tell them I have kids in my interview. So I would have to look for other ways to be memorable. I know I had a colleague at one point that ran marathons, not just as a hobbyist. Like, she competes in the Boston Marathon. She won the Oklahoma City Marathon a couple of years ago. Like, she's legitimate as far as her running career is concerned. And I remember her talking about that in the interview when we hired her. And that resonated with us so much, because were we hiring her to run? No. But it just said so much about her. It said so much about her discipline. It said so much about her self-confidence. It said so much about her ability to manage hard work. And so it's okay to share personal things about yourself, but try to choose things that are going to be memorable or that are going to stand out a little bit to people. Also, be purposeful. When you think of the information that you choose to share with people, know that you're creating this picture of who you are. So you want to choose purposeful information. You want to also tell them the things that resonate with your purpose. So like I said, I work in higher education. I work at a teaching institution. That is my purpose. Do I like research? Yes. Am I okay at it? I'm okay at it. But my purpose is that being in the classroom and that experiential learning with students. So before I came to UCM, I was working at an R1. And so when I talk about my time working at the R1, I'm talking about what I was able to do in the classroom, because that is my purpose. So think about yourself and think about your narrative that you want to share with people. Make sure you're identifying what's memorable and make sure you're identifying what's purposeful. Also, I would encourage you to try to be authentic. You need to practice this in advance, because you don't want to blow the first question, right? Oh, gosh, I guess I hadn't thought about that. But you also don't want to over-practice, over-rehearse, or memorize your answer, because you also want to be authentic with the information that you are sharing. So look at your resume, look at your skill set, draw out the things that you think are important, think about some other aspects that you want to add that are memorable and purposeful, and then practice, but don't practice it to death. Yes, Sydney?
Someone on Zoom asked, how many people apply for assistant professor positions in communication sciences and disorders on a higher ed job list? Which I think that might be that higher ed job search site.
Yeah, higher ed jobs.
And how many jobs should I apply for?
That is a really good question. I don't know. Actually, my sister is the clinical director of the CSD lab at the University of Central Missouri. That would be a good question to ask her. I know that, and I'm being anecdotal here, I understand that I am, but when my sister transitioned from industry to higher education in CSD, right, she has a clinical doctorate opposed to a PhD, so her job search was different. I want to say that she applied to, that I know of, about a dozen institutions, because there's not that many in CSD. I mean, it's not like being in history, right, where you can apply at every university because they all have a history department. So I would say apply to all the ones that are as of interest to you. Is she typing anything back? Or he, I guess. Typically female-dominated field, but not always.
They said thank you.
Sure, no problem. I wish my sister's here. She could like break that down for you. Like, here's how many applicants we had for this job, for this job, for this job, but she's not. You guys are stuck with me. Any other questions about, tell me about yourself or anything else? Okay, so other things that you want to be prepared to talk about in the interview. You want to know what your greatest strengths are. Generally, people are not going to ask you the question, like, what are your greatest strengths? Sometimes they will, but people are getting away from asking that question in that particular format. You still need to know what your strengths are, because you want to be able to communicate those strengths through the other questions that they're asking you. So before you go into an interview, I see I'll get to you, you want to identify probably 5 different strengths that you would like to highlight that relate to that position. You want to have the word for that strength. I've been in so many interviews when people are like, well, what's that thing? What do you call it? I have tenacity. Yes, tenacity. Okay, so identify the word for that strength and think of an example of that strength. I have incredible tenacity. For example, when I was going through the job search, I applied to 147 positions and interviewed 138 times. Not really, but you think of an example that illuminates that particular strength. Yes, ma'am. Oh, what are they not allowed to ask you in an interview? That's an excellent question. Typically, information dealing with marital status, whether or not you have children, whether or not you want to have children, whether or not you plan to have children, all of that's completely out of, I'm not saying it never happens, but that's completely out of lines. Things that relate to your religion, things that relate to a disability or a medical limitation would all be things that they shouldn't ask you. And I'm not saying they won't ask you. I will say more often than not, when I've encountered those types of situations or worked with people that have countered those types of situations, people typically aren't being malicious by asking those questions. They just don't know. They haven't been trained to not ask those types of questions. But those would be the types of things that it's technically illegal to ask somebody. And so we would try not to share unless you can do the calculation. If you feel like it's a big enough part of you that they need to know, that's on you. Like I know some people are like, I am going to talk about my kids. They're a big part of my life, and I'm not going to work for somewhere that doesn't value the fact that I have children. Okay, that's on you, and you can make that decision. They shouldn't be asking you those questions.
This is kind of an odd question, but related to this. So say you're like interviewing someone else, and they bring it up. Are you allowed to, do you just have to like ignore it, or can you comment on it, acknowledge it? Like, this has happened to me and I have not known what to do.
So if you're in the committee and they bring it up, like the kids thing, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have to ignore it? Can you comment on it? No, you don't have to ignore it. Yes, you can. Just be very, very careful that you're not saying anything that you just never know where people are going to go with things, right? You can certainly acknowledge it, but I would try not to spend any time there. Because if they're not the selected one for the position, even though they volunteered the information, you wouldn't want them to come back with, well, but it's because I told them I had the kids and they're just not family friendly, so I'm going to sue them. Yeah, so it's, you know, you don't have to ignore it when candidates present that information, but I would encourage you not to spend time there. And a good redirect, even though it feels cold and ugly, maybe like, oh, that's really interesting information. Thank you for sharing. I would like to focus on, yeah.
Because with like a lot of like academic positions, you'll do like a second
right
visit. You'll like,
or you'll be there for
family.
2 days.
You'll bring your family and they'll have you get together with other professors' families. Yep. And it's kind of like, but all this is illegal. It's like, I've never really understood.
It's illegal for them to hire you based on that. But yeah, very often. I mean, whenever we take candidates out, they bring their spouse or their significant other or oftentimes their children. We're not allowed to ask if that's their spouse or their girlfriend or their partner or their best friend, you know, so it's up, the candidate can disclose what the candidate chooses to disclose as a hiring committee or as a hiring professional. Just do your best to not put too much focus there, even though you're also sending them real estate listings. You want to know how many kids they have because you want to see the houses that are available for the, yeah, it's a tricky line.
This may be a better question for your next talk, but what do you do if they bring up salary? If they ask you what you would accept, etc.?
That's a really good question. Tune in next Tuesday. But I will say, generally, because I don't want to not answer the question altogether, the further you can wait in the process to have that discussion, the better off you're going to be. But if they ask you, anytime you go into an interview situation, you need to be prepared to have that discussion, even though it'd be better not to. If it's a screening interview, you need to have a range in mind. So don't go into a screening interview without knowing what your approximate worth is in that field and in that geographic area. Don't go in for a hiring interview without having a number in mind. And on Tuesday, we'll talk about 3 types of numbers.
Working for the same boss for a very long time, is it my strength or is my weakness?
That's a good, working for the same boss for an extreme long time. Is it a strength or is it a weakness? I would say generally it would be perceived as a strength, but it would all depend on the type of organization that you are looking to transition into. If you're looking to go into an organization that's fast-paced, nobody stays there for more than 6 months, they're preparing you for the next opportunity, they might see you as an ill fit. You might also perceive yourself as an ill fit, right? If you have that spirit of longevity about you. Most people interpret longevity and loyalty as a positive quality. And that's actually something that if you think about getting a new position, when you think about your strengths and you think about the narrative that you're creating for yourself, that may be something that you want to address so you can spin it in the way that you want to. I agree. Did you have a hand up? Yes.
So
responses to personality type questions be related to the technical aspects of the job responsibilities?
Should responses to personality type questions be related to the technical aspects of job responsibilities? I love that question. Yes. Oftentimes, so if you are required to take a personality inventory as a part of the screening process, and this is what people struggle with, they're like, well, are they talking about home me? Are they talking about work me? Are they talking about out with my friends me? When you are answering those questions, and obvious time they're like scenarios and how would you respond, think about it being a work-related scenario, because that's really more the information that they're trying to get from you. So yes, think about it from that frame of your technical skills or of your professional skills. That's a really good question. Other questions? Okay, so back where we left off, think about your strengths. Have 5 or so strengths that you've identified and have language for. Again, sometimes we're like, I'm just that kind of a person. What is that kind of a person? And then an example that illuminates that. Have those in mind so you can draw from those in the other questions you're being asked. And then it's also a good idea to be in touch with your weaknesses. Again, it's rare these days that people say, what's your greatest weakness? Right? We're just more nuanced and finessed in our question answering, but there might be a question that relates to areas that you need to improve upon. And so I would say, if you are asked a question that relates to your weaknesses, first of all, be honest-ish, right? Be mostly honest. Choose an actual weakness. Don't choose a job-threatening weakness. Okay, if you are interviewing to be an airline pilot, you don't say, oh, I'm bad under pressure or whatever, right? That's not the right weakness. So think about a weakness or something, an actual area of improvement for yourself. Don't say things like, oh, I'm just too hardworking, right? Or that's what people tend to do. They take their greatest strength and they turn it into a weakness. Like, I'm just really likable, so nobody ever leaves me alone. Okay, don't do that. Choose an actual area for improvement. And then you present that area, and then you show how you can improve on that or how you have improved on that. So choose something that's not job threatening. Well, public speaking is an area where I could certainly improve. Okay, even though it's not the most comfortable thing for me, when I was an undergraduate and then again in my professional studies, I did have to do quite a bit of public speaking in my classes. And so even though it's not my favorite thing, it's certainly something that I've learned to be okay at. That's how we present a weakness. Here's what the actual thing is that you're probably still going to hire me anyway. Here's how I got better at it, or I can get better at it. And spend your time talking about the improvement phase as opposed to just hammering on how awful you are at X particular thing. Okay? So no 5 strengths, no 1 weakness, but don't tell them the weakness unless they ask. That's fun stuff they can find out after they hire you. The other types of questions that you really need to be prepared for, and this is where the majority of your questioning is probably going to come from, is situational-based questioning. When you are in the hiring interview, this is the type of questioning where people generally spend the majority of their time. Tell me about a time when you were in a leadership position. Tell me about a time when you resolved a conflict. Tell me about a time you had to work with a difficult patient, customer, or coworker. Tell me about a time when. And the reasoning for the tell me about a time questions I kind of alluded to in the beginning is it's because people think that your past performance is the greatest indicator of your future performance. So if I can find out how you responded to something in the past, I can have a pretty good sense for how you're going to respond to something in the future. When you are asked situational-based questioning, and again, a good indication that you're being asked that is it starts with tell me about a time when, we use what's called the STAR method. And the STAR method stands for situation, task, action, and result. And so those are the 4 different pieces that you want to hit on in a situational-based question. Now, what happens when people get asked situational-based questions? Tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a customer or coworker. And this is what people say. Well, I really don't get into a lot of conflicts with people, but when I do, I try to resolve them quickly. Well, that's perfectly forgettable, okay? And that's also not what I asked you. I said to tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a customer or coworker. So the situation was when I was an undergraduate, I'm trying to think, that's probably not perfectly relevant to you guys. So this one time when I was in my lab class, I had this partner that was really unsavory. This is my situation. And our task was we had to complete this particular project, but my partner never showed up in order to get their part done. So the action I took was I made sure that I did everything I could. I was communicating with my partner. I notified my instructor to let them know of what was happening here. And as a result, even though we didn't get as good a grade on the project as we wanted, I was able to learn what I needed to learn and also prove to my instructor and to my other classmates that I was hardworking. It's a bad example. I should have come prepared, right? But situation, task, action, result. It's not, well, generally this is how I handle a situation. No, this is a particular situation where I encountered this particular thing and here's how it worked out. The reason that we do this, the reason that we rely upon the STAR method and we do situation, task, action, result is because it allows us to tell the story. And telling somebody how you actually responded in a situation is much more illuminating than telling somebody how it is you think you handle those situations. It also allows you to become memorable because through using the STAR method, we tell stories. And people remember that when they're sitting around in the committee room after all the candidates have left, they're like, oh yeah, that guy, he was the one that had the bad lab partner. That's what we remember. It's not the, oh yeah, she was the one that usually doesn't engage in conflict, but when she does, resolves it quickly. Okay, we remember the stories that we tell. So when you are asked these situational-based questions, it's your opportunity to tell the story, to talk about your response and your reactions to things in a story framework, which goes back to this side of being memorable. Okay. Any questions about situational-based questioning?
So let's say I'm asked a question that I really haven't thought about. So does it happen like people take pauses because pauses are awkward?
Yes, and I get that question actually pretty frequently. So they ask me a question, it's a really good question, I haven't thought about it. Can you take some time to think about it? Absolutely. People love an authentic interview answer. So if you say, gosh, that's a really good question, let me think about it. First of all, you can acknowledge that and then they back off of you a little bit instead of just waiting for you, right? And then take some time. Sometimes we just can't think of anything. Try not to do that. But if you find yourself in that situation, it's not the end of the world to say, that's a good question. I can't think of anything right now after you've clearly taken time to think about it. Can we revisit this question later in the interview? If you have to do that once, it's not going to kill you. If you have to do that for every question, it may not be the right fit for you. So, but yes, if you need some additional time to think, acknowledge to the committee or to the interviewer that you need some time to think. They said people love authentic and candid interview responses, so giving you time to come up with one is not something that most people would be opposed to. It's a good question. Any other questions? I know we're almost out of time. I want to touch briefly on follow-up, but is there anything else that you guys would like me to address before I do? Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'll just own it. I'm a very nervous, anxious person, and sometimes I worry, obviously, during an interview about how that is coming off and being portrayed. Is there any advice for kind of managing that or the perception of that?
I think maybe that's a really fun thing for you to share and tell me about yourself. Is that you happen to, that here's all the great things about you and about your personality. You happen to be somebody who's, we could think of better words, right? Conscientious and concerned with impression management. But I think sometimes when we own those things in the very beginning, that it becomes less of an issue because we've said it now, right? So it's out there. So you're nervous, so they know, great. And then you can move on with the line of questioning. So if you find it to be something that's inhibitive, I would think of maybe how we spin it a little bit into being this positive part of our identity, and we just share it. And then you don't have to worry about hiding it. Okay, closing with impact. So at the end of the interview or somewhere in the interview, they're likely going to ask you, do you have any questions for us? The correct answer is yes, you do have questions for them. Oftentimes people don't know what types of questions to ask, so things that I would recommend, be wise on current events, especially current events in so much as how they affect the corporation or the organization. So I just noticed that you guys were opening a campus in China. How do you anticipate the riots and whatever to affect that or whatever? I'm just making stuff up, but you know what I mean, right? And that's why it's a good idea, if we come back to our job search, have Google alerts set up on the organizations that you're with, Google News alerts, because you'll see what's happening that's newsworthy, and then you can ask them well-informed questions when you are there in the interview. I would advocate for asking every single person they give you an opportunity to talk to about the company culture. People are trying to sell you the organization, so everybody may not answer you in full disclosure when you ask that question. But again, especially like higher ed interviews where you're there for 2 whole days, ask every single person you meet a culture question and see if there's a consistent theme that's being created. And if some people say it's awful here and some people say it's wonderful here, then that at least allows your antenna to go up and you can start to think really heavily about what you value, okay? It's always good to ask about opportunities for career transition and career growth. So when I come into this position, and some types of positions have very clear lines for career growth, some of them don't, but it's good to indicate to people that maybe you would like to grow within that organization, and so what does that look like? And also I would encourage you to ask about measures for success. How do we know that somebody in this position is successful? How will I be measured on my performance? What are the indicators that you're looking for that I am performing successfully in my position? At the interview phase, people are generally willing to talk candidly with you about these types of things in a way that sometimes they aren't once you get hired. So what does it mean to be successful in this position? And then I would encourage you to ask any spontaneous questions or questions that have come up as a part of your process. It's like if you're interviewing on a college campus, so like, where do I park, right? I know where you let me park today, but where do I really park when I come to work here? Those types of things, those logistical types of things that come up throughout the course of the interview, don't hesitate to ask those as well. What you shouldn't ask is anything that's probably on their homepage, anything that you probably could have just Googled. Questions like, oh, what do you guys do here? Okay, you need to know that type of stuff going into it. But other than that, questions that you have a genuine curiosity about, I would encourage you to ask. And then finally, the last point that I have up here is following up. You should follow up. Anytime you have an interview, whether it's a screening interview or an in-person interview, it's important to make follow-up contact. There's lots of different advice on how to do this. I happen to still be a fan of writing thank you letters, but I just like to write thank you cards. I write them all the time for everything. I like to thank people. Other people would say that an email thank you is more than sufficient. Either way, you need to make sure that once you step back from the interview and you've had a chance to reflect on your experience, that you are reaching out to the people that hosted you and you're expressing your appreciation and your gratitude for their time. And yes, I have been a part of selection committees before where I'm not going to say that we didn't hire somebody because they didn't send a thank you, but sometimes there's 2 candidates that are really, really good and you can only hire one of them and you walk out of the room and you have no idea what you're going to do. And one of them reaches out and says, wow, that was awesome. They felt as good about it as you did. They can't wait to work there. And the other one you don't hear from. All other things being equal, you want to hire the person that wants to work for you. Yes, sir.
So sometimes in the first round of interview, there's a screening stage or recruiter. By the end of the interview, they will let you know what is the name of the actual
Hiring manager.
The hiring manager, and they will ask you to get ready for that. So do you think it will be a good idea to research on that person?
Yes.
You can find what their past work is about, what
yes.
their current work is about. Because in the next interview, I don't want to say things to compliment this person to make him feel I'm trying to flatter him. But in the meantime, I want to make the connections with this person to
absolutely
in terms of how I understand his work.
If you know who's going to be interviewing you, or if you can look at the website and get a sense for maybe who's even the chair of that department or the head of that department or the, yes, research those people if you can. And you're right, you don't want to necessarily be inauthentic and just talk about stuff because you know they're interested in it, but very often you're going to find a common point of interest or just show them that you've done your research and that you're knowledgeable. And for those of you working in higher education or want to stay in the university structure, this is really, really important. If you're going to come interview with me, know my research, know my background, and then we can talk about it, right? And we can also see how well your stream and your interests fit within the stream that we've cultivated in our department. So yeah, absolutely. If you know who you're going to interview, do your research on them, and it's impressive to people and it makes them feel good if you can show them what you know about them.
Do any of these dynamics change if
you're being recruited by them? You're still going through the interview and everything, but they're like recruiting you?
I would say yes and no. If you are the one being recruited, then it's yours to lose, right? You're already coming from a place of an advantage. There may be several people that are being recruited though, so it's not necessarily yours. But I would say that the information I'm sharing is generally best practice information. So regardless of what the situation is, I'm trying to think if there's something that would be, that I would advise differently if you were being recruited by them. Probably not. Probably not with this particular set of information. Good question. Sure. You certainly can. LinkedIn would be an appropriate place to connect with people. And if you want to do it before the interview, after the interview, that would be perfectly appropriate. LinkedIn, yes. Facebook, no. Yes.
How long after the interview should you wait to send a thank you?
Oh, that's such a good question. And something I didn't mention, so I'm going to answer the question and tell you guys something also very important. It depends on what their process is going to look like. However, I would say soon, but not so soon that it feels inauthentic. So like, don't go out to your car and write the thank you note and bring it back. And I do know some people who encourage that, but I would say sleep on it, respond, send the email or the thank you card in the morning, because you want to be authentic. And in a best case scenario, the thank you that you're writing is really sincere and it's kind of reflective on your experience. So be reflective about your experience, and it's hard to do that when the adrenaline of the interview is still coursing through your veins. The one thing that's not up there that really should be up there when it comes time to ask questions, the one question that you have to ask, I promise you, you need to ask this because it's your right to know and it's good for your own sanity. Where does the process go from here? How will you be notifying candidates? And I even go as far as to say, if I am not your selected candidate, how will I be notified? Because some people never tell you. Like 3 months later, you're like, well, guess I didn't get the job because I never heard back from anybody. It's really, really important to know what people's process looks like and when you can expect to be informed. And this comes back to your question, or is kind of coming full circle here. For those of you guys that are actively job searching, not just, oh, I might switch jobs, that, hey, I'm going to need a job here pretty quickly. You likely will be interviewing and speaking to lots and lots of different organizations. You likely have a priority. Here's who I'd really like to work for. Here's somewhere I would work. Here's somebody I didn't know about, but they seem interesting. You have to know what people's processes look like so you can be prepared to leverage your different offers and different opportunities, which ties nicely into salary negotiation, which we'll be talking about next Tuesday. But do not leave the interview without understanding what their process is. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at your phone for every 6 seconds, right? And they may not be making a decision for 3 weeks. It'd be nice if you knew that, wouldn't it? So make sure that you ask about the process, ask as many questions as you want about the process. It's your right as a candidate to have this information. So there's no reason to feel awkward about it. Any other questions? Well, this was fun. Do I have to go back to work? Yes. Mm-hmm.
So is it a good idea, because I'm also in conversation with other PIs as well, other than the person I'm getting interviewed by.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a good idea for me to ask her, like, if she's also, interviewing other candidates, or is it a no-no question?
The question is it okay to ask if they're looking at other candidates? I'm not sure that that's something that
Because if suppose she is telling me that if you are looking into other positions as well,
mm-hmm.
So is it a good idea vice versa, or is it a no-no?
Typically not. I would encourage you not to ask that. I don't know that you can't ask that, but I would really just stay focused on what you're bringing to the table. Now, if you're concerned that you're having a conversation because you feel like this is going to be your opportunity and you are not exploring other opportunities because of that, then that may be something that you do want to clarify. So if there's a conversation happening where you're under the impression that this is going to be your job when it's time for it to be your job, you may want to clarify that very explicitly. otherwise, it's pretty safe to assume that people are looking at all of the talent that's out there and trying to find the best fit for everybody. Good question. Other questions? Okay, thank you guys so much for spending your afternoon with me. Again, I apologize for the time change. I will plan to be back at actual noon next Tuesday. So if you guys want to come learn about salary negotiation, I hope that you'll join me. So thank you.